Rip City Mornings.
I've made it no secret on this show. Me, along with my wife, but I'm not gonna use her as a shield here. I love it. I love Bravo shows. Watched Vanderpump Rules last night, the finale. Whew. Can't wait for the reunion. They're just gonna start yelling at each other. The Valley with Jax, Kristen. It's all nuts. The Real Housewives, Southern Hospitality. All because I love the drama. I love the drama so much in both reality TV and in sports. Behind the curtain, I've been watching a podcast just dropped with Deshaun Jackson and Shady McCoy. They are tearing Chip Kelly to shreds right now. And there's also a lot of new podcasts with old school NBA guys from the 90s that just like Gilbert Arenas just goes on and starts talking about how trash new players are. I love all the drama. Is there drama potentially coming with the Portland Trail Blazers? Because of a Chris Mannix tweet that dropped yesterday. And we've got a draft lottery on the way. We have got a draft on the way. All that to discuss with our next guest, friend of the program, been far too long, host of the Locked On Blazers podcast. I don't know how much drama they get into, but Mike Richman back on the big show. Rich, how we doing, bud?
Doing good. Listen, when the drama comes to your doorstep, you have to address it regardless.
Okay, we're going to get into this Blazer thing and this Chris Mannix tweet and all of this, but I know that you are also not just a Blazer a podcast host. You are a fan of the entire basketball world and culture. Where are you at with these old basketball players who just like to podcast once a week and just trash all the new players? I don't agree with them, but I kind of like it.
Yeah, I think it sucks. It's just like, I don't know. There's a certain flavor to it that is like, I don't like Nikola Jokic. And it would be more fun if they just said that.
Yeah.
It would be more fun if they just said, I don't like Nikola Jokic because he's boring and weird and he looks like Gru. But like, instead it's like, these guys aren't good and they couldn't hang. Nikola Jokic would destroy any era. Like it's I don't know, but I will say this: I'm not going to be too critical because a lot of them have like a white nerd as their co-host. And I would love that. I would love that job. I'm open to it. I would be more than willing to be the white nerd on some classic NBA stars podcast. No problem. Sign me up.
Well, yeah, you are the pass first point guard host of the Blazer podcast world, and you would be willing to be a pass first point guard of whether it's Pat Bev's got his white nerd, even though he kind of battle raps, and then Shaq's got his white nerd too, doesn't he?
Yeah, and like even JJ Redick has a white nerd. Like he
is a white nerd.
It is a cross-racial thing. It's just like if you're a former basketball player, what you need to host a podcast is a white dork. And if I am one thing, I'm that.
It is my time to shine, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's dive into this because we brought you on because I wanted to talk about the offseason, potential moves for the Blazers. Obviously, there's a lottery coming up on Sunday. I'd be lying to you, Richman, if I told you like, oh man, I've done a deep dive into this draft. I have not. I've heard of maybe 3 players. All of this, and then lo and behold, Chris Mannix throws out a tweet yesterday saying that there's a situation going on potentially with the Blazers and Chauncey Billups. And we saw the coaching shakeup over the weekend with his brother's contract not being renewed. Some may say that he was fired. Obviously, there's a lot of different situations, and we haven't really heard anything since 12:30 yesterday. What was your reaction when you saw that, knowing kind of the way NBA insiders work as you do, and what is going to be potentially the future of Chauncey Billups and the Portland Trail Blazers right now?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that tweet, right?
Yeah.
there's a lot of subtext in 2 sentences.
I got 3 hours out of it.
Listen, you're telling me, brother. As someone who makes content every day, I thank my lucky stars for a 12:30 drop. The idea that the league is monitoring the situation makes sense. Like monitoring being kind of like a code word for like the sharks circling the waters. But everyone's monitoring the situation because it's weird. It's weird what happened. It is odd that the the franchise said, no, we're not going to fire Chauncey Billups. He's our coach. And then heading into the offseason, they choose not to renew his lead assistant and his little brother.
Yeah.
It's not like they fired the whole coaching staff and said, hey, we're going to start over. It was pretty specific choices. And I don't know the contract situation of everyone on the coaching staff, but like not bringing back your lead assistant who's been with you from day one and your little brother is like a thing that I would have monitored. If I was another team, that would get your antenna up and you'd say, hey, that's weird. That's a weird thing. So I'm not surprised that there is that is happening. But if the Blazers were going to fire Chauncey Billups, they would have done it the day the season ended. Yeah. They wouldn't have waited. There's no reason to wait. So what we're kind of watching is Chauncey Billups going to walk away? Is there a relationship that is sort of broken and he's going to quit? And I think that is what folks are monitoring because if the Blazers wanted to fire him, they've had plenty of opportunity to do so.
Well, here's what's interesting, Mike, as you said that, and something popped into my head because you said, yeah, we're not going to fire Chauncey Billups. We're 100% behind him. We're moving forward with Chauncey Billups. And then his lead assistant and his little brother, as another assistant, are not going to get renewed. I don't know. It seems very familiar to we want to get a certain point guard some help, and that help is going to be his 19-year-old replacement. It feels very similar to that.
It does seem like they're operating in a similar way. We'll do anything to build around Damian Lillard. Anything. We'll be so aggressive to do so. Actually, we're just going to draft another teenager who plays the same position as him.
All right, so we're on the same page there. This is the other thing that I thought was interesting as we go into the other sentence that perked my interest up because it said Chauncey Billups would become a lead candidate or not lead, I added that, would become a candidate for other jobs. Okay, so the Wizards is open. I don't think that's the one. What else happened, Mike, in the last, 6 or 7 days? Oh, that's right. The Lakers job is now open.
Yeah, the team that's mostly operated by Clutch Sports fired their coach, and Chauncey Billups happens to be represented by Clutch Sports. That is what happened.
Boom. So, how much of this? Because again, I'm not an insider. That's why we bring you onto the program. I don't have sources. I went to 2 games this year. Okay, so I rely on you and other actual real reporters, but it seemed to me, up until the assistant coach shakeup, that there was no situation to monitor for the last month. And so that's why I'm just wondering, is this whole thing a domino effect from the Lakers job opening up?
Yeah, and like one of the dominoes effects of the Lakers job might be there's been some reporting that they're interested in Monty Williams who's coaching Detroit. So it might not just be the Clutch connection, which is a very obvious one. Agents run the league. It's incredibly important to sort of understand that. But if Monty Williams were to leave, then another place where Chauncey has deep roots in Detroit would also have an opening. And it would be a job that I think, quite frankly, would make more sense for him in general, although I think he would rather coach a good team. I think he's been pretty clear that he would rather coach a good team than a bad team. Who wouldn't? Who among us wouldn't want to coach a good team as opposed to a bad team? So there's a lot there. I would be surprised if Chauncey Billups immediately got a head coaching job. He's won like less than 35% of his games. Some of that intentional. Obviously, the team has built bad rosters, and then they've tried to lose games at the end of each season. So that's not all on him. But I think Billups has mostly underachieved. So I would be surprised if he were to get a head coaching job, but anything's possible. The NBA is very weird. And like he's still Chauncey freaking Billups. Like he's still a Hall of Fame point guard with won a Finals MVP and all that, and like played in the league. He played games against some players who are still in the league, including Damian Lillard and LeBron James. Like he's not that far removed.
Mike Richman, host of the Locked On Blazers podcast. He's a friend of the program, joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio. You mentioned that like the last week has been kind of weird. I mean, I talked about this earlier in the show. Really, Mike, let's peel back a little bit more. The last 3 years has been kind of weird because if you go back and put yourself, and it's tough because, you know, you and I, we're both daily content people. We're on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis. But if you go back and remember where we were when Chauncey Billups got hired, he was not hired to rebuild the Blazers. He was hired by Neil
Absolutely,
Olshey to take the Blazers from good to great, to be another voice to get them out of the rut that they fell into with, and I'm using air quotes, rut with Terry Stotts, which was winning lots of games and going to the playoffs. That was the job he was brought into in July. By November, Neil was fired. By January, Dame was out for the season. And by February, CJ was gone. And then the rest is kind of what it was. This was not the job he was brought in for.
And I don't think you would hire Chauncey Billups for this job. I don't think you would hire an inexperienced coach to be a teacher. To be a teacher of a young team that needs to build and all of these things. You would hire Chauncey Billups for the job that he was hired for, which is a team full of veterans trying to make that needs like gravitas and voice and a strong voice in the room to sort of get them to buy into a plan. So like, I don't think that if you just kind of had whatever the value of hindsight or whatever, the benefit of hindsight, Chauncey Billups wouldn't have wanted the job that it became, and the Blazers wouldn't have wanted to hire him for the job that it became. He was hired to do something different, and it just changed dramatically, really, really quickly. And now they're in this weird spot where they have publicly said they want him to be around, and maybe he doesn't want to be around.
Mike Richman from the Locked On Blazers podcast joining us here on 620 Rip City Radio. Obviously, we'll continue to keep an eye on this situation. One more thing before we get into the draft, because I think a lot of Blazer fans, at least myself included, very intrigued at the future of Anthony Simons, because you know I mentioned it earlier in the show. When you look at what Joe Cronin in the front office has done, I mean, Ant and Chauncey Billups is kind of the last remaining elements of the Neil Olshey era. Everybody else is kind of gone and out the door, and there's two kind of entities that are sitting there. One's Anthony Simons and one is Chauncey Billups, and obviously there's the whole Chauncey Billups thing that happened yesterday. And I wonder, is Ant also going to be kind of in this spot where the Blazers, again, they're very guard heavy, we know that. Ant said after the game he wants to win. Again, novel concept. We all want to win. But I think his value would be fairly high. Is this the offseason where Joe Cronin trades away Anthony Simons?
It does seem like he is a bit of the, I don't know if odd man out is the right thing, but it does seem like he is he is kind of in between plans, right? Like he's not like so old that he's from another generation, but they drafted behind him each of the last two drafts, right? They took two top 7 picks and took guards. They're heavily invested in what Scoot Henderson becomes just by virtue of drafting Scoot Henderson 3rd overall. They're heavily invested in that. And Anthony Simons has 2 seasons remaining on his contract, and he's entering his 7th NBA season. And when he says, I want to be part of winning, that does kind of have a hint of, I would be happy to win in another jersey, right? Yeah. Like I just want to be competitive. I don't know if this is the summer they will do it. I believe it's the summer they should do it. I think they've just come to the point in their rebuild where they should, instead of trying to move forward and making it perfectly fit, square peg into a round hole, they just got to trade Anthony Simons and see what they get for him. If there is no good deal out there, you don't absolutely have to do it, but you absolutely have to explore what the market is for him, just for the sake of the franchise.
All right, Richman, on Sunday, the ping pong balls are going to be popping, and we will find out a whole lot more by Sunday evening where what's going to be going on with the Blazers this offseason. I talked about it earlier this week. It's odd to me, and obviously there's a lot of reasons why, but it's odd to me we're going into this. The Blazers have now kind of, whether it's soft tank or full tank for the last 3 years, and for the most part, you kind of know what is – the big gift. What is the big prize in the NBA lottery? It was Paolo 2 years ago. It was Wemby last year. I know that everybody is trash talking this draft, but if you look at kind of the available players, let's just say the Blazers get that number 1 ping pong ball. Like, what's the jersey that Scoot Henderson would hold up if he were to hold up kind of those makeshift jerseys?
I guess it's Alex Sarr, the big guy who's playing professionally in Australia, the brother of former Blazer great Olivier Sarr.
Never forget the Sarr legacy.
Yeah, a guy who was on a 2-way contract and broke his wrist, and then they waived him. But like, I don't think Sarr in and of himself is like a game-changing NBA player. He might be good for a long time. He might even be a really good defensive player and a long-term starter in the league, but no one who you kind of like, if you do even a medium dive into the draft stuff, I don't think anyone says like this dude is like life-changing, franchise-changing good. That player just maybe doesn't exist in the draft. What does exist is probably like a lot of role players. And while the Blazers desperately need stars, what they really need to do, like, and this is just like this is sort of just, big picture stuff for the health of the franchise, they got to get the draft right. Mm-hmm. Even if you're just drafting role players, like even if you're just drafting guys who are like long-term, I'd play a decade in the league as solid contributors, they have to get those players. They cannot come away empty-handed. So even if there isn't a star, if there isn't that front line Paolo Banchero all-star in year 2 type of thing, Victor Wembanyama, like one of the 15 best players in the league maybe already. Even if there isn't that, they just need to come away with this draft with like players who can play and be part of the long-term plan, because the further that you kick the can down the road, and they're going to kick the can down the road this season, you still need parts, like when you're searching for your star, you still need parts behind that star to make it work.
Well, and that kind of goes into my next question, because there's always that debate, right? When you're, let's say they're somewhere 3, 4, 5 range, right? You're right in there. You don't get the 1 or 2 pick, but you're 3, 4, 5 range. And it's like, do you pick for need or do you pick best available? And Richman, I'm just wondering, like, do the Blazers have a need? Or is it they're to the point where best available and you find out, other than maybe if it's another point guard, because obviously right, that's a spot that they are taking care of. But like, other than that, like, do the Blazers have the luxury of having a need, or is it just no matter what, best available?
I pretty much lean in this sort of theoretical world and best available. I even think like, and I don't know this, I'm just like in theory, like if Nikola Topic, the big Serbian point guard, is on the board, and they think he's the best player on the board, if the Blazers value him as like he's clearly better than all the other prospects, it presents an interesting, strange world where they might have to say, even if this is a point guardy type guy who's 6'6", we still have to take him because we value him the most. I don't think the Blazers have a single player on the roster that is good enough that you would say we can't draft over him. Drafting another 6'3" guard would be weird. I think in general, drafting another guard isn't ideal. I think they should wings and bigs is who they should prioritize. But I don't think they have anyone on the roster that if they, like in their scouting, because they're better at this than I am, in their scouting world, if they believe someone is that level of a player, that they can say, hey, we already have that position filled. Because when you do that, you draft Martell Webster over Chris Paul, and you don't want to get there. You don't want to be there because you don't want to prioritize Sebastian Telfair 20 years later.
I could just see the pain in producer Brendan's eyes as you just dropped the Martell Webster over Chris Paul. Mike Richman, he is the host of the Locked On Blazers podcast. You can follow him on X or Twitter at Mike G. Rich. Tweets less than I do, which, tip of the cap, Richman. Impressive, because I thought I was the worst tweeter in Portland media. Tweets less than I do, and probably much happier for it.
Well, no one's paying me to send tweets anymore,
Boom.
So
exactly right.
Find the other places.
There it is. And the other place is the Locked On Blazers podcast. And from time to time, even though he's not paid to appear on this show, he is very generous with his time. Hey, Rich, always love talking to you, bud. Have a great day. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Justin. See you, man.